And now I have the honor to introduce the first session of this year's conference, the CEO Perspective. Our CEO leaders will be sharing their views on sustainable aviation. Please join me to welcome Director General IATA, Willy Walsh. CEO Air Europa, Valentin Lago. Steve Allen, CEO of Denata. And CEO of Aviopartner, Richard Prince. Moderator of this session will be Nick Kareen, Senior Vice President, Operations, Safety and Security at IATA. Have fun, enjoy the dialogue. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. The sound is good? Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. As you can see, I'm the only non-CEO here on the floor. So, but I had every time she said CEO this morning, it made me laugh because I woke up last night at 3 o'clock for some reason. I couldn't get back to sleep. So I'm from Canada, and my father is on the far east coast in Newfoundland. And he's a New York Rangers fan. So I watched the game, and the Rangers won, and they're going into the semifinals. And he says, so what are you doing up, and what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, we kick off this event as a CEO panel. And he said, CEO panel, what's that? I said, I don't know. We're going to talk about ground handling and where we're going and all that stuff. He said, ask them all if they sleep like babies. And I said, sleep like babies? He goes, yeah. He said, they wake up every 2 hours crying. So I couldn't get that out of my head. But, we're going to try to treat this like a conversation this morning to get the juices flowing. I think everybody has already been introduced in terms of what their roles will play. Richard and Steve from a ground handling perspective. We've got Valentina from the airline perspective, and we have a former pilot from Aer Lingus on the end there to give us their perspective. So I think I'll start off with simply asking, start with Willie from an industry perspective, and then ask each one of the CEOs to expand upon, what did we learn from the last couple of years in terms of COVID? Just a brief, and then at the moment, where are we from an industry perspective? So Willie, if you wouldn't mind sort of starting there.
Sure. Well, I think without question, this is the deepest and most prolonged crisis the industry has ever seen. Those of us who have been in the industry for a long time have seen many different crises over the years. People often ask me, how does this compare to some of the others? And maybe one way of looking at it is look at how revenues were impacted. And if you go back to 2001, in 2001, for the industry, revenue fell by 6.4% versus 2000. At the time, that was a massive crisis for many airlines. You roll forward to 2009 and the global financial crisis, revenue fell by 16.5% in 2009 versus 2008. So on a much bigger scale to what we'd seen in 2001. And then you look at what happened in 2000, and revenues fell by 56% versus 2019. So, this is unlike anything we've seen before. And I think it was mentioned, Monica said it as well, the great thing about our industry is the resilience that we've shown. The fact that we're still here today and we're still talking, I think it demonstrates that we've learned from previous crises. We've implemented change much more quickly. There was great determination being demonstrated by everybody. People were clear in terms of what they needed to do, acted quickly, took all measures possible to keep their businesses in place. And now we're faced with what I think are business as usual challenges, rebuilding our networks, rebuilding schedules, getting people back into the business. And while this is incredibly challenging now, it's a nice challenge to have relative to where we've been over the past 2 years. So terrible 2-year period for the industry, but we're still in business, we're rebuilding, and I'm actually quite optimistic about the demand scenario for the summer and for the rest of the year. I think it's going to be a good year for everybody in this industry, and we need it. We need to start rebuilding and repairing the damage that's been done to the balance sheets of all of the airlines and ground handling companies and all associated activities.
Thanks, William. Appreciate it. Valentin, what are your thoughts?
Okay. On my perspective, the last 2 years has been, as Willie said, like crazy. But nowadays we have to be focused on the present, learning from the past. And one of the things that we are learning is we must recover as fast as we can. And fortunately, the explosion of demand is here, and the majority of the industry is here to capturing this demand. So we expect this year for the industry a better year. And one of the things that we have learned is the resilience of not only the industry, the people that are working in the industry, and being in some airlines, and people are what difference the airline. So everybody has a challenge to retain this talent, and apart from pricing and so on, the next war is going to be for the talent in the industry, and I think we are going to talk later on about that.
Thank you. Steve?
I think just building on what's been said already, really, I think one of the things we've learned is that the turbulence, there's a new definition of turbulence, which is what's happening in our industry over the last 3 years, and the fact that we have to look at the way we work with our customers, really understand what their intentions are, and plan and replan on a much more regular basis than we ever have done before. So we can match our plans with the plans of our customers. I think we need to rethink the seasonality of the way the industry's worked in the past. So that's something. The resilience of the people is obvious, but we should never talk about COVID without mentioning it. I mean, I think it has been absolutely incredible the way the industry has ridden that turbulence. And I think we've learned that automation has to be the future. I think standardization is essential to be able to automate, and we need to progress with that. I think we've understood that each part of the world has recovered at different paces, and the ability to treat the world as a global business rather than local businesses, so that we can move our resources and our capability around, is something that certainly stands us in good stead. So the way that I see it right now is that it's given us a tremendous opportunity to rethink what we do. We've reduced our cost base. We have different people working for us, a lot of new people working for us. We have a new perspective on digitization. I mean, before COVID, a lot of us had never used Teams, Zoom, or a lot of the technology we're using now, and we're able to use that. And we need to rethink how we operate as businesses. And I also think, the relationship with our customers, we need to rethink as well. Look at how we contract with customers and how we can build a bit more resilience into the contracting between us. So a number of things I think we can build on. As I say, I think now we need to look forward. We need to make sure that we take those learnings, but we take them forward into a better industry for the future.
Richard?
Yeah, look, I think a lot has been said. I'll pick 2 points. One point from William and 1 point from Steve. And I think the reality is the challenges we face today, they are business as usual challenges, which is how do we get people back to the airport? How do we get resources in place to ensure that the airports work and the system improves, and therefore performance improves and helps us all rebound? But the reality is that just going back to do what we did before isn't going to be the solution. So you then take what Steve said, which is, so now we have to look at how we do the work differently in the future. Let's not just, yes, we have to solve the problem of today, but we have to change the focus. We have to talk about, and what we have to work out, and what we have to develop is, what does the future look like in relation to our industry? Whether that's the passenger journey, whether what happens on the ramp, whether it's about digitalization or automation of GSC, that is where the future should be. And I think we have to not get too lost in trying to fix the past and the resourcing and the challenges, and focus more on how do we become a different type of organisation, providing a different type of services. And I think from Aviabar's perspective, we're talking about what is the future product that we are selling to airlines? What are they, today they're buying a transactional service from us. We transact with the passenger at check-in. We transact with the individual bag when we load an aircraft. That's not going to be the future. The future will be different in terms of what the passenger does and how they move through the airport, and then what automation brings and the experience of how ramp operations are run. And that then leads to, so what type of people do we need to employ in the future versus the type of people we employ today? And it's a different type of person. And again, generations are changing, people are changing. We're not going to be able to go out and recruit thousands of people who want to lift bags and do that type of work all day the way they've done it before. So that recruitment focus is fixed today, but focus on the future because it's a different set of talents and a different set of skills potentially than we currently employ.
So everybody kind of touched on a bunch of different things. I mean, rebuilding, rebalancing, resilience. One of the major challenges, and Monica mentioned it as well, and Richard, you touch on future, but right now is around staffing. And you guys both, speaking with you prior, have interesting perspectives in terms of different challenges and where they exist at the moment. So let's start there. What are everybody's views in terms of the challenges that the industry is facing, not only from a ground service perspective, but anywhere for that matter in terms of staffing. So let's start with you, Steve, and then we'll let the others pipe in.
Yeah, I think the staffing shortages problems are a problem really for certain parts of the world. So, you know, if you look at the US, UK, Europe, and Australia, there's significant challenges on staff shortages. I think some of that is linked to labour migration. You know, a lot of the migrant workers went home or found other roles during the course of the pandemic. And we relied very, very heavily on the migrant workers for the lower skilled roles. And then, of course, you know, going up the value chain, you know, the people that we need for the future, like the data scientists, the analysts, you know, have gone to tech companies who have boomed and thrived during the pandemic, and we need to attract them back into our businesses. So, you know, we really need to add the what I call the magic dust back into our industry. You know, prior to COVID, we always talked about, you know, everybody loves working in the industry. It's so interesting, and, you know, aviation fuel and all that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, we need to get that feeling back again. My feeling is it will come back, but, you know, we have a mountain to climb, frankly, in those locations. On the flip side, I was in Brazil recently. If I wanted to recruit another 500 people, I could do it tomorrow. And that's the problem, is that, you know, we've got a real sort of labour migration issue here from our perspective.
Yeah, I'll build on that. I think, again, we were very deliberate when the pandemic first took place and first started to take impact, which we didn't. We believed that the ability to bring back resources quickly would be fundamental. So we deliberately chose not to run the downsizing programs. We deliberately said we will invest in retaining the people. And that's been critical for us in terms of where we are today in markets like France, Italy, and Spain, where we don't really see any resourcing issues. And then, you know, building on what you said, Steve, where economic migration was a real key thing, like in Germany, for example, we're in the same position as other companies because the economic migrants left and just chose to go and work somewhere else. And again, in the Netherlands, where, you know, they had the best furlough program in the world. They paid 100% of people's salaries. 250 people just walked out the door because they wanted to go and work. They had other opportunities. So I think it's a challenge market by market for sure, and I think it depends where you are.
Yeah, I would agree with what was said there, and I think these are temporary problems. You know, I think we can overcome them, and let's not forget, you know, we faced these problems every year as we went into the peak season, trying to recruit people, get them into the system. You know, so we've faced challenges like this. The problem, and Monica touched on it, is one of the major impediments that we're facing now is the time it takes to get people through the security clearance process, which has extended way beyond what we were used to in a lot of countries. You know, instead of being 3 weeks, it's 3 months. And that wasn't something that a lot of people factored into their planning. But as I said, these are real challenges, and they're going to be very difficult for airlines, ground handling companies to deal with. But it's a much nicer challenge to have than when you're ramping your activity down from 100% to 5%, which is what we were doing in April 2020. It's not common across the world. I think it also reflects different labour retention schemes that governments put in place. I think the Spanish government were very smart in the schemes that they had, the ERTE, which helped to keep people operating in the system. The UK to some degree, but not to the same degree. So I think, you know, we're going to face a little bit of a challenge to get people back. But I think it also reflects the speed at which the recovery is now taking place. Because don't forget, international travel in 2021 was only at 24% of where we were in 2019. You know, so we were still way down in the depths of a crisis in 2021. First quarter of this year, international travel had recovered to 42%. But, you know, it's still significantly down on where we were in 2019. As Valentin said, what we're seeing now is an explosion in demand, which is a nice thing to see. So, you know, let's not get too carried away and too concerned. I think we will manage our way through this peak summer in Europe. It will be challenging, more challenging than we've seen before, but we will manage our way through it.
I think just picking up on the security screening thing, though, you know, when you recruit somebody, there's three phases. You sort of do the recruitment and the referencing, you do the screening to get them SI passes, and then you do the training. And I think the future population is going to move jobs much more regularly than they ever have done before, which means we need to make those processes as slick as we possibly can. So, you know, the length of time it used to take for referencing, the length of time it used to take for screening, and the length of time it used to take for training has to be shortened to enable us to be more agile. And on all of those things, I mean, if I take training, for example, the more we can standardize both what we do and our equipment and the technology we use, the quicker we can get people out on the ramp or in the check-in areas. You know, so you know, we can bring people in and out in a much more slick way. And I think that's the sort of thing we've got to think about for the longer-term future, because the generation today move jobs much more regularly than they did in the past. And it's just a fact of life.
Yeah, but I think it was talked about before. You have to break down the barriers across our industry, whether it's into country or into airport, where we have resources today. We could send to somewhere to solve the problem, but it's so complex to get that airport or that country's training, standard, security pass. They've been through the process, but you can't send them to go and help support an operation in a different country because the complexity of the rules mean that, we just can't do that. Well, they've gone through the European vetting procedure. They're generally a good person. They're well trained to an Avia partner standard, which is common across the whole of our organisation, yet we can't send them there. So again, we're wasting time and creating huge inefficiency with no connected system. And I think if IATA can bring that through things like IGOM and standardised training and standardised AHM, GSE fleet requirements plus training standards, it does solve and could lead to a different way of doing business.
Okay, in my opinion, there is in the key process of recruiting, we must focus on one thing that has changed. First is a generation is quite different than ours, and second, they have passed through 2 years of their mind are different. So we must understand what's happening in their minds and what are the necessity requirements and so on, and be sure in the recruitment process we don't lose time with people that are going to never get into the industry. So we must understand the new generation and what happened in their mind during those 2 years of COVID. And after that, we should develop smarter contracts for them, you know, with career plans, rotation in different positions, and also just talk to the lobbies and being able to build a smart contract with deal with seasonality, training, and so on. You know, I would look at this problem from a global perspective, because if you continue doing the same and it's not working, as we are experiencing in this faster time of recruiting and about falling in highly company, we are going to suffer. So for me, understanding what happened in the minds of the new generation that want or not want to be in the industry, in the aviation industry, is a fundamental issue.
It's funny, you talk about this industry, I can't remember where I read the quote, but someone was saying that the first time they joined the industry, they met the CEO in the elevator and said, welcome to the business. What floor you choose to get off is up to you. And I think most of us in here probably started at the bottom of an organization and worked our way up, or certainly with an entry-level job. And I'm not sure there's any business in the world that actually operates like that to the extent that the aviation industry does. So articulating that as a career plan certainly for sure would help attract it. But everybody mentioned standardization and transferability and you know sort of and Monica mentioned in her entry speech on terms of using the passport. What's stopping us from, you know, what's preventing us from doing the logical thing here?
Well, you know, it's something we have to address, and we've addressed it. I go back to my flying career. So, you know, what we learned on the flying side of the business is you keep the aircraft standards, so Boeing build it, you leave it as it is, you take it from Boeing and you operate it. And you operate it in the same way. So in 1990, I flew a Turkish-registered Boeing 737-400 on the inaugural flight for Pegasus. I'd never been in the aircraft before. The guy I was flying with, I'd never met him before. But you were able to put two different nationalities in the cockpit of a Turkish aircraft and operate it safely because the switches were in exactly the same place on every 737, and the procedures were exactly the same. We don't do that on the ground handling side of the business, and we have to, because there's so much cost that can be eliminated by standardization. Safety is really enhanced if you can keep the procedures the same everywhere. And you can put people working together that have never worked together before because everybody knows what they have to do and they're doing it the same way no matter where they are. And that's, you know, the industry has learned from that, and it's one of the reasons why our safety standards are so high, because we all learn from one another, but standardization is the key to a safe and efficient operation. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from what we've successfully done on the flying side of the business in the air to what we do on the ground.
It takes a better level of cooperation or direction, because the reality is we have already today platforms that were created to do this, yet people opt in or opt out of them depending on what they want to do. ISAGO was set as the standard for safety. Aviapartner, one of the first big organisations to go through that process. Today, we have it in 28 of our 48 stations, and all the other stations are affiliated. We've just been through the new ISAGO standard, and then we still get 60 or 70 airline audits every year. It creates huge cost, and then they say, yeah, we like ISAGO, but we want to do it slightly differently. And we want to look for this, and we want to check for that, and we have a different checklist. So the platform's there. No one takes it. That's the challenge we have.
But I think it definitely comes back to the culture and the determination of senior management, because there's no reason to have such difference in standards. You know, and that tends to be people just dreaming up new ways of doing it. This business is much safer if we all operate in the same way, because we can learn better from one another. And you know, as I said, you can work with people you've never met before because you know that they're going to do it in exactly the same way as you're going to do it. And we have to, as an industry, drive to achieve that standardization.
Yeah, I completely agree with what's been said. I think at the moment it's in our hands because the regulators have not quite caught up with us yet in many parts of the world, but they will. And so I think there's two things. In some ways, the final hurdle will be when the regulators come in. So it'll be, we can take it so far, but everybody's not going to be standardized until the regulators step in my view. But what's important is we control that process. So at the moment, we're defining our standards and we're all working together to collaborate on it. When the regulators get involved, like with EASA or ICAO, you know, we need industry experts in the room making sure that the regulations that come in make sense, and that we can help to define that in the direction that we want them to go. So I can see all that sort of starting to happen. I think what's happening at the moment might drive that even further. There is a huge fear about safety right now, not just within the industry, but outside the industry because of the newness of lots of the employees and the shortage of staff. And so I can see the regulators sort of warming up to say we need to take control of this and we need to make sure we're in control of that discussion.
Okay, my perspective, standardization is the key issue, you know, and I miss the airport standardization, as Richard said. Imagine, let's imagine the same parking in any airport in the world. You know, imagine that could be significant also for automation. You know, with the same distance, same approaches, and whatever. So it could be a source of automation and optimization for the industry, and everybody should push on that. You know, not only from the ground or airline perspective, but the airports. I think they could be an effort on that. You know.
Well, the rest of the conference, I know in terms of what we're going to talk about are those very things in terms of making ISAGO what it needs to be, making IGOM what it needs to be, and then eventually developing those standards and getting, you know, with the goal of bringing something to our board that we can begin to have our airlines support it. And the reduction in audits needs to happen. There's no doubt about that, because there's a lot of
I guess the
redundancy.
challenge, Nick, from a ground handler's perspective is, what are the airlines saying? You know, you're the airline representatives. You know, what are the airlines saying about this? Because it's actually the airlines that drive us to do things differently a lot of the time. And we need your help to really drive them to say, guys, stick to where you can make a difference. Yeah? Because this does not make a difference to our industry. In fact, it harms us. Stick to the things that you can good at, where you can add the bells and whistles and the customer service. And, you know, let the ground handlers define how to do ground handling.
Yeah. No, Steve, you're absolutely right, and that comes back to the point I was making. So even if I look back at my time at IAG, where we had several airlines within the group, you know, they didn't have the same procedures for ground handling across the group. Same aircraft. Now, over time, what we were doing is we were moving to have completely standard aircraft and completely standard procedures. And it does take time, because, you know, everybody will have a reason for doing it their way. But more often than not, the reason is not good enough to say we're not going to standardize across the group. So I think the sooner the industry moves in that direction, the better. And, you know, going back to the points that were made earlier, this is the opportunity to change things. You know, so you could argue this is coming out of a crisis, facing a challenge. These are always the times that you should use to change the way you've done it, because you can't just go back to the way we used to do it. I think there's a great opportunity to start moving the industry closer to a standard way of operating.
No, and as a good intervention, I think some of the challenges have been we haven't articulated properly the benefits for our industry in terms of bringing it to the board to say, you know, for example, the IGOM portal is brand new, but what it's designed to do is to show how many people are using it, but also the variations in terms of procedures, so that we can settle on what is the right one. You know, and that could be something as simple as how many cones we put around an airplane. You know, it's crazy the type of level of detail that we'll get into, but the intent is really to come up with a book in terms of the IGOM that is the best that's out there, that can be used as the standard. And the ISAGO piece too, in terms of some of the things we've changed around the cost and the implementation of that, but ultimately it has to result in reduction of audits. I think in some ways we've been asking the wrong people too, because, you know, when you're in an industry association and you're speaking to industry representatives from a safety perspective, and their job is to do these audits, and we say we'd like to reduce them, well, let's face it, that's not necessarily the right people to ask. And so I think really we're in a position now to properly present and articulate what we want. And I think that's really important intervention. You guys mentioned automation. I guess automation technology. I mean, I think I've said this at every IGHC I've been in. The 1970s called, and they want their ideas back. We do ground handling pretty much the same way it's always been done. Just like you could probably get into a 737-400, I'm pretty sure I could handle a turnaround. What's in the way of this, the automation and the next level of investment in terms of technology on the ground?
I don't want to be dull, but standardization is going to really help, because if you're going to automate, introduce autonomous vehicles, introduce more robotics into around the aircraft, then you have to have standardized parking, you have to have, you know, standardized blueprinted stands, you know, all these things, you know, that's going to really help. I think investment is the other thing. You know, it takes a great deal of investment, and this industry's got very, very narrow margins. And so we have to decide where we invest our money. You know, many of these things have long-term paybacks. You know, you're working on autonomous vehicles right now. Realistically, how quickly are we going to get autonomous vehicles in and around an aircraft? You know, that's going to be sort of a long time. So, you know, I think we need to make sure we channel our investment in the right areas and we pull some of that. But yeah, as I say, standardization is key.
I mean, above the wing always gets the investment. I mean, you spent, I'm interested from an airline side of things, when you were in your role, Willie and Valentin, in terms of prioritizing investment and what your view is on where the ramps are headset.
No, I think Steve made the point, you know, standardization is what you need first, and then you need some investment. But if you look at it, you know, you think of autonomous vehicles, but, you know, every airport that we fly to, the precision available to park the aircraft is so good today that you know the aircraft is going to be parked in the same spot every time. Why don't we have autonomous air bridges? You know, like we've all sat on board aircraft and there's somebody trying to steer the air bridge to the aircraft going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and you're staring out the window looking at them as they're trying to adjust it. You know, a computer can operate that in an autonomous way. These are opportunities for us, and we're going to have to pursue these opportunities. Now, the investment, I don't believe, will be significant. It just needs to get on the agenda when people are looking at where we're going to start spending money. But without question, and everybody said it, we're going to have to do things in a different way going forward than we've done in the past. And I think that will incentivize people to look at where can we invest sensibly to take advantage of automation that we know is capable. It's been around for a long time, and we know it's not going to, you know, cost a huge amount of money. It just requires the right focus and the right attitude.
My opinion, and I think is the same in any board of directors, CAPES should be very, very support in terms of business cases. So we hope that the next year won't be the same, but nowadays it's not the same. But it doesn't mean that investment is a must for any company in the world. So I didn't know anything about autonomous vehicles. You can illustrate me. But imagine that it would the same parking, same distance, same approaches. It would be less investment required for an autonomous vehicle. So standardization, I really said this, should be the first. And nowadays I'm translating what we are doing in several years, that the process and the disruption decision-making in the sense of automation. We have been working in operation control centers with artificial intelligence, just how to trigger the decision-making, not to wait till the on-duty chief or supervisor or whatever, just automatically deploy a trigger with the decision-making and so on. And we are developing, and some works, other don't. But I think it's a source of investment that it's not requiring too much CAPEX and OPEX, but we are investing on that. And imagine the same for the handling processes in a standardization world, or better world.
It's not just about investment doesn't solve everything. It's about the right investment and the right tools at the right time to do the job. And again, who makes the investment? Is it a ground handler? Is it the airport? Is it the airline? At the moment, it's a mix of all three. And actually, no one's doing it particularly well. That's why there's many challenges. But the reality is, if you look at the way we do business today, the way we contract today, in that traditional cycle of 3-year contract or 1-year contract or whatever it is, it doesn't provide a platform for investment. And I think there is a shift with many of the larger airline groups to look beyond that cycle and look at how we're going to work together for the next 7 to 12 years, and actually what investments we need to make today in the way we operate together to change the way that works. And actually, how do we collaborate with the airport, with the airline or the group of airlines and the handler to bring together the right level of investment, the right level of automation that the industry can sustain today while it continues to standardize. And I think we're seeing that more and more and it's not even, pre-COVID, it was a business case to be more efficient, to save more money, to reduce resources. Today, it's a business case to be able to operate successfully in the future, because you just can't get the resources or the industry's changed. So I think there is a shift that we see today away from that traditional approach, and therefore that will create the platform for the investment, and then it's just about getting the right level of collaboration on the ground. I think some of the challenges with automation, number one, the technology exists, but it's not on the road today. So if it's not on the road today, be sure it's not coming to an airport anytime quickly, because that's always the precursor. So that's the first step. And then the second step is, if you have automation, you can't operate as 3 or 4 ground handlers, because that's never going to work, because the airport has to be managed differently and run differently. We're a long way, I think, from that. Automation on the ramp has been a solution. But the standard, so for Aviabana, for example, our view of the world in standardization of assisted loaded devices with all the stations and where we work, changing the experience of the individuals that do the job. You know, for years, people have joined our business, they've got into aircraft holds and they've thrown bags along it and they've done all sorts. You have to stop that. You have to give them the tools to do the job properly. There are tools that exist today that means that that job is a completely different job. It's placing the bag, it's organising, it's doing things differently. So there is opportunities to invest, to create standardisation, to change the way we work, to bring people to us and retain people, to provide career paths. That doesn't mean that you're going to automate the world. I think that's still a long way away.
But you all touched on it. Who pays for it seems to be the biggest hindrance on below the wing, because above the wing it never seems to be a debate. It never has been. Automation is always new. Everything, bag drops. You can't go to an airport without seeing the investment that's gone into technology and advancements in terms of self-service, et cetera. But on the ramp, it seems we get into the debate about who pays for it. So, how do we crack that nut, Steve? What's
Well, something that's been on my mind for a while is if I was a GSE provider, and I hate to kill our industry, but if I was a GSE provider or a builder of infrastructure or something like that, I would be investing big time on robotics. Yeah. I'd be investing big time on autonomous, because then you can sell products of the future. They're too slow. It's all happening too slowly. And I think we should sort of push that one. I think, our business is providing the manpower to handle all of this equipment, so we're kind of killing ourselves. So then we need to adapt to sort of say, well, what's our role in the future, and how do we, maybe we should be thinking about how we work with the GSE providers more. I think the airports as well, the airports should be, really pushing for sort of investing in the capability that just makes the process more simple and repeatable, and so it becomes a much smaller issue for them. An aircraft turnaround should not, an aircraft shouldn't go late by 30 minutes if everything is fully automated, and therefore it helps the efficiency of the airport. So I'm not sure it's us that's going to pay for it. If I was in the other parts of the supply chain, I'd be saying, I want to jump in here.
I would agree. Automation in aircraft came from the manufacturers. Excuse me, it didn't come from the airlines. So I think if I was GSE, I'd be looking at automation. Definitely, that's the opportunity.
Yeah. So the other thing that you mentioned, and I guess it's standing in the way sort of all of this in some respects, and it's regulation, or the increase push towards regulation, and the inability of our arguments around self-regulated industry. EASA is pushing, and they've set a deadline. They are going to come up with regulations around ground operations. It's the only area within our business that isn't regulated at the moment. ICAO seems to be very interested, primarily driven from discussions in EASA. But there's many parts of the world that are not in favor of this either. So it's going to take a while, I think, before we finally see some sort of regulation. And I do believe that we probably would be better off self-regulating. So that means standardization with the use of IGAM and ISAGO. But Steve, you're the ones that you mentioned that. What's your view?
I think it will happen. I think it's, as you say, it's one of the only parts of the whole industry that's not regulated. So we just need to be in on the discussions and make sure that it happens in the right way and that it happens efficiently. What can sometimes happen with regulation is you bring in regulation, that's add massive cost into an industry that doesn't need it because you've gone in the wrong direction and used people who don't understand the business. So we really want to be in the forefront of that and helping to make sure the regulation goes in the right direction.
And we want to be at the forefront of it because what we want is we want an industry that's prepared to operate to the same standards that we set. So we believe we set really high standards, and we hold ourselves accountable to really high standards, whether that's through ISAGO or through airline audits, whatever it is. We set ourselves to that standard, and what we see around us is people that don't, and that destroys the industry. So if you're going to, I don't believe, by the way, we should have regulation. I think regulation adds constraints to innovation, adds constraints to thinking about how we do work differently, adds constraints and barriers to entry, which no one really wants, and why would want to create that? But I think if it's framed in the right way, potentially it works. But if we are going to do it, then the standards have to be high. No point regulating to the lowest common denominator. What's the point of that?
But that's what they will do, because if you're
point?
looking at EASA will approach this from a safety angle. They will want to get involved because they believe there's something that they can do to improve safety, and they will look at a low standard to ensure safety is achieved. Now, if that's what we want, that's fine. I don't think regulation is to be feared, but I think it would be better if we did it ourselves, because the regulators don't have the skills. And it's not a criticism of them, they just don't have the skills. They're not involved, they don't have people working in EASA who have worked on a ramp, who know what the challenges are. So they will need help if they are going to regulate. And it would be better if we did it ourselves, because we know much better than they do what is required. But they will approach it from a safety point of view. You know what EASA are like. If they focus on this, they're going to do it. It's inevitable that they're going to do it.
In my opinion, regulation is good and necessary, but over-regulation without common sense will become in collateral costs that may be constrain the industry. So what I know that EASA is going to regulate from a safety and security point of view, but in my opinion, what you really need is the quality management system works perfectly, and there will be a proof for EASA that over-regulation is not necessary. So what we really must do is to have quality system that avoid failures, keep the standards, and so on.
My big fear about regulation is that it will be politically motivated and influenced rather than safety motivated and influenced. And that's something that we've been pushing back on hard with EASA. They should not be influenced by politics. And unfortunately, there are times, and there is evidence that shows that politics can play a role. And there's no role for politics in safety, none whatsoever. But that is the fear that I would have there, that we'll end up with systems that have been influenced by politics rather than by the business and rather than safety.
Like you mean COVID procedures? Yeah. Right. So we only have a couple of minutes left. Thanks, gentlemen. I really do appreciate the fact that you gave us the time this morning. Any parting advice, words of wisdom that you, anything we didn't cover that you thought that we'd like to bring up?
I'm not sure wisdom is the right word, but I mean, I think in many ways it's the toughest time in the industry, but it's also one of the most exciting. It's toughest because we've got this short-term problem of the additional costs we're taking on board with inflation, and we need to understand how we can work our way through that. But the exciting piece is that for management teams and strategists and things like that in our business, there are so many opportunities we can unlock right now. And we've got to put our cumulative brain power together to work out how is this business going to be different, and let's make sure that we actually make it different with this opportunity rather than just reverting back to the way it was before.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is going to be a great time. It's going to be exciting, it's going to be challenging, but this is, for me, I honestly believe this is the opportunity that the industry has required. And The people who succeed will be the people who take advantage of this and change the way they do things in a fundamental way to ensure that they're better prepared for the future, having learned from everything we've gone through. So I genuinely think this is going to be an exciting time for the industry.
My opinion, the fact is 2 years of some months, the world fleet grounded. And after 2 years, we are all here and recovering. We had demonstrated that apart from our resilience, that we are needed for the world. So we had to take advantage of this opportunity and get more closer all the value chain of the industry and use the lobbies for improve the industry standard for us and get money, because it's not nonsense.
Final word.
I have no words of wisdom, but what I would say is that Steve talked about it earlier. We've learned to work differently in the last 2 years. We've learned to communicate differently and to reach agreements differently. So my parting words would be, use the time you have in the next 2 days to really connect with people. Meet the people you really need to have a meaningful discussion about something, that you get something more when you're face to face. And actually, as we go forward as an industry, we should continue to do business the way we've done business for the last 2 years and use events like this to be much more meaningful and much more powerful, and coming here to really get back to the essence of what agreements we were making, who we're talking to, what are we discussing as an industry, and pull some of those things together to get real value out of this, out of an event today and the next 2 days. So I encourage everyone to go and meet, go and talk, go and have a great time, enjoy connecting with each other, because it's been a long, tough 2 years. And the challenge is exciting, and it'll be really good for everyone that works here. But the next 2 days, your colleagues, friends, relax, have a drink, enjoy each other's company. It's what the business is about. It's not all work, work, work. Apparently.
Hang out with him.
In the first round.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll bring it to a close. Thanks again, gentlemen. I really appreciate the time, and I hope it was informative for you guys, and wish everybody a great conference. Have a great day.
Thank you.